Welcome back to the Start to Finish course on upgrading to .NET Core. We are currently in the module focused on adding some of the common .NET Core features into our application. In this lesson, we're going to be focusing on logging and how to add logging using the iLogger to our application. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and in MVC, like I said before, this already has everything we need. So for example, in the home controller, we can see it's already asking for an iLogger of type home controller, and it's getting it. So dependency injection is already working, and so is logging. Now the problem is we don't have that in any of our other project types. So let's tackle the WinForm project type. Go to program.cs, and here's where we configure dependency injection, but how do we add logging into this as well? Well, Microsoft has provided the interface iLogger, and that allows us to use the same iLogger interface with different logging systems. There's the built-in .NET Core one, there's nlog, there's Serilog, and there's other logging systems as well. What we're going to do is we're going to add the support for iLogger into our WPF and WinForm applications, but then we're going to upgrade. Instead of using the built-in .NET Core version, which can only do to the dash or to the console and also the debug window, we're going to add in Serilog, because Serilog takes it to the next level and allows us to do various different types of syncs. The reason I'm going to upgrade right away is because of the fact that getting the default one in is quite a pain, and you're almost certainly going to want to upgrade it to a better version anyway. And so I'm going to skip the intermediate step that's painful and not really helpful and go right to implementing a third-party logging system. I'm going to choose Serilog because of the fact that it's a pretty popular logging system and allows for some additional features in logging that other applications just don't do. So we're going to use Serilog. We're just going to use the surface of it. We're not going to go very deep with it. I just want to add logging in general to our application. So let's start by adding some NuGet packages. We're going to start with the Microsoft.extensions.logging. This is where the iLogger comes from. Once that one's installed, we need to add a few Serilog packages. First, Serilog itself. We also want serilog.syncs.file. And what this does is it allows you to write to a file. And the last one to add is this serilog.extensions.logging, which is a low-level Serilog provider for Microsoft.extensions.logging. So we want to install that one as well. So now we have the Serilog packages and the Microsoft extensions.logging package installed. Now we can start configuring our Serilog. Now the way to do that is we come up to the top here and we're going to configure our logger first before we do anything else. So we're going to say log, which control dot to add a using for Serilog, log.logger equals new logger configuration. And this is where we configure Serilog. I'm going to say the minimum level, let's just set it for debug for now. And the minimum level dot override for Microsoft is going to be a warning level. So log event level dot warning. Let's make that into a using statement here. So we'll get rid of this part and do a control dot here to add a using statement there. And we're going to enrich from log content or context, sorry. And then we're going to write to a file, and let's give it a file path in just a minute and say create logger. Okay, now what is this doing? Why is it doing it? What this is doing is it's configuring how our logger works, what levels it does, and where it's going to log to. Eventually, and this comes right from the documentation from Serilog, but eventually you don't want to move this into a configuration file because this is configured in our application, and so you can't change the minimum level here to something else in your application. You want to change it in your config file. So that's something we want to make sure that we get right, is eventually this goes into our log file or our appsettings.json file. But for now, this is fine. This is how it's configured. That's cool. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is we need to add our logging down here as a service. But this is a little different in the fact that we're not going to log just an iLogger. We're going to say services.add singleton, and we're going to say an iLogger factory, which control dot to add our using statement here, which doesn't have it. This comes from a using statement. There we go. So Microsoft.extensions.logging. And it looks like I may have spelled it wrong. I did spell it wrong. Don't you love this? So Microsoft has gotten so brilliant with its tooling that it says, hey, moron, you forgot the Y in factory, but I'm pretty sure what you mean is iLogger factory. And if so, here's what you do. And that's just awesome. So it's now changed my spelling mistake, and it has added the using statement up top. So that's just, I'm thrilled. Microsoft has done a great job with this product. Okay, so I'm going to create a variable here for our Lambda expression, and then I'm going to have my curly braces. And inside here, we're going to say var for provider collection equals x.getService for logger provider collection, which control dot on that to add a using statement for Serilog.extensions.logging. And then from here, and this is all in their example on GitHub. So this is where open source really helps. And it really helps if you do create an open source project to create some examples so people can go and look and see, okay, here's how I would implement it in my application. So I'll provide a link in just a minute for this as well. So var factory equals new Serilog logger factory. We're going to pass in null and then true for dispose and provider collection for the last option. We're going to do a for each. We're going to say var provider in x.getServices for iLogger provider. And for each one of those, we're going to say factory.add provider for that item. And then finally, after all of this, we're going to return factory. All right, so what is this doing? Well, what it's doing is it's going through and wiring up all the different iLoggers that we might need. Because, and let's go look at our home controller again. Notice that the iLogger is of type home controller. What that actually does is it passes information into the constructor and it says, okay, let's make a note that this works in the home controller so that whenever we log messages, we can capture the fact that it's in the home controller that it's working. Okay, so that's additional information we can pass in. Well, that's part of what this is doing here. Is it complicated? Yes, absolutely. But the good news is we just have to get to work, and we know that it's wiring up that factory so that whenever we ask for an iLogger, the factory can provide the appropriate iLogger. All right, so I'm going to put the right up here here is the Serolog example, and there's the GitHub link for that example there. So with that, we should have logging in place. Now we're not quite done yet because this logger, we want to make sure that we flush the logs when we're done. That way, not everything writes to the location right away. So if you're logging to, say, Microsoft SQL, and you are writing messages, it doesn't necessarily write every message one by one. It usually batches those messages so that it is more efficient on your server and it's faster. Well, if you're halfway through a batch and you close your application, you don't want to lose those last messages. And so you want to make sure that you properly close out your log. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this entire thing right here. We're going to wrap, this is in static void main. We're going to go a snippet, surround with, and we're going to say try. I'm going to say capture the exception, just in case we have an exception. And I'm going to, in here, I'm going to say log dot, do a log dot fatal because it's a fatal exception. Pass in the exception, and there was a major problem that crashed the application. And pass the exception as well. So that's the log.fatal. But either way, so we're going to have a finally here. And inside of our finally, what we're going to do is say log.close and flush. So that way, no matter what, we close and flush our logs out and make sure that we have everything taken care of. Okay, so there's our logging. Now, we need to set up where this is logging to. So let's right click on our solution and open folder in File Explorer. And in here, I'm going to log up one level. At this level right here, let's log. So I'm going to copy this path, and I'm going to put my @ symbol in front here, and this allows me to put my my single slashes without a problem. And I need to give it a name for my log file. This is a text file, but it can be .csv, it could be .log, it could be .tim. Doesn't matter. It's going to be behind the scenes, or the actual file itself will be a text file. It's just your extension choice is yours. Since this is the WinForm project, WinForm log.txt sounds about right. Now, just to make sure this is working, whoops, I hit play instead of save. Let's wait for that, and we'll hit stop here. To make sure this is working, let's go to our main form, which that's the tournament dashboard form. That's what's going to load. So tournament dashboard form, let's view code on this, and I'm going to ask for an iLogger. Control dot to add a using statement. And it's for Microsoft.extensions.logging. I want an iLogger of type tournament dashboard form. Just call it log. And right after initialize components, I'm going to say log.log. Let's do log information and say this is the start of our WinForm application. Real simple. So we've asked for an iLogger of type tournament dashboard form, and we've then logged something. So it should be that folder will have the have a text file now, and in that text file will be our log statement. So let's run this now. All right, wait for it to fully compile and load. I didn't put a breakpoint here. I just want to let it run. And it looks like I started the wrong one anyway, so let's stop that and go. We're going to right click on our tracker UI and set as startup project and launch this instead. Okay, so it started. That's cool. We come down here and go to winform log.txt. We open that up and see that this is the start of our WinForm application. Excellent. So we now have logging for our WinForm application. I am going to take this log statement back out and this request for the logger back out because I want to wait to do this until I'm going to do it right. But now that we have that in place, we can do something very, very similar for our demo WPF application. So in our app XAML.cs, we can come over here. In fact, we can go ahead and grab this configuration of our logger and come back over. And before our host, we can paste this in, and we can, we need to have our various NuGet packages. So let's open up our packages list here, right click on our dependencies for WPF and say manage NuGet packages. And we're going to install Microsoft.extensions.logging. And we're going to install the 3 Serolog files or packages. So Serolog itself, Serolog.extensions.logging, and Serolog.syncs.file. We're going to accept all of those. And to make life easier, we can also come up here and grab the 3 Serologs and the Microsoft extensions.logging using statements and copy them and come up here and paste them in. So now this all looks right, except for we need to change this to WPF log so you don't confuse the two. And now let's wrap this in a try catch. So right click and say surround or a snippet surround with, and try and tab, and now EX. And just like before, we're going to, in fact, I'm going to make life easier and just copy and paste that message. In fact, I copy and paste that message and the finally. No reason to waste your time doing the same exact thing. So log the fatal issue and close and flush in the finally either way. All right, now we should work on our setup for our host builder, and that looks exactly the same. So we can come here and grab the singleton, come back over here and add it in. And why is I do work still here? Oh, because we do have I do work. Okay. Forgot this was the demo project. All right. So now we have our singleton in place. Now we can, in our main, we can ask for an iLogger. Control dot to add that using statement. And say iLogger of type main window, call it log. And then here we're going to log information. The demo WPF app started just fine. And let's go back to our app.xaml and let's just change this from WPF log to WPF demo log. That way we have 2 different WPF projects. So let's set this as a startup project and run it. Once this runs, it's going to open up. It did. We can close it back down, actually. Come down here, WPF demo log.txt, and our demo WPF app started just fine. So same exact process for WPF. Now, it will be a slightly different process for our tracker WPF UI, because this one has Caliburn Micro. So let's right-click on our dependencies and add our NuGet packages first. So we're going to add a NuGet package not on the package source of caliburnmicro.packagesource. We're going to go to nuget.org, and for this one, we want the extensions.logging. And we also want the Serolog packages. So serial log itself. Want the syncs.file. And we want the extensions.logging. Okay, so all three of those are installed. Now let's do this. Let's keep open program.cs but close the others so you don't get confused. And we'll collapse this down. And now we have Bootstrapper. How are we going? We're going to paste that in here, and let's delete this and delete that. And it does not have an add singleton, so it's just singleton. Okay, so it's singleton instead of add singleton. So we'll delete this and this, like so. And it goes, yeah, that's not going to work right. And the reason why is because it says that cannot convert a lambda expression to type string. Singleton doesn't handle factories. But I believe that if we use a handler instead, that will handle the factory. So that's a step in the right direction, but now we don't have a get service off of this X value. Now the reason why is because we're saying get service, but that's not quite right. We have get instance and get all instances. So it seemed like we can say instead of get service, we can look for get instance. Like so. And instead of get services, we're going to do get instances or get all instances. There we go. That looks like it's going to work. We're going to find out in just a minute, but we still have to do some configuration as well. So we've added our singleton, our factory, and now we need to configure our logger itself. So let's go back over here and grab our log statement. Grab that, come back over here on the constructor. At least I don't think it does. Let's do this. We're going to find out real quick. We're going to put a breakpoint right there, and we'll see when this breakpoint gets hit. Is it before or after this is displayed, or is it when the application gets closed? So let's change this to our startup project. So right click and says startup project, and run this. All right, it's starting. We have a breakpoint already, but no form on the screen. So I hit continue, and now the application is still running. It's just that it's not showing us the form, interestingly enough, but it's not continuing the startup method until it's done. Now, if we come down here and look, we'll see that the Caliburn micro log has a log file. Nothing's written to it yet, but that's because we haven't made the modification yet. Let's do that. So we need to do some investigation here. Now, if I was using source control, and I'm not right now, I'm kind of kicking myself for that. If I was using source control, then it wouldn't be much of a problem. I could just roll back to the previous version that was working and find out why it's now not working. to do some very basic diagnostics. I'm going to try and undo what I have been doing and comment out these two sections here and just see if that in itself solves the problem. And it doesn't seem to. The application does not start anymore, so that wasn't it. But I'll leave those commented out just so I don't mess with anything. So I have my container. Let's look at the. I have a thought. The shell view model. Nope, it's not asking. I was wondering if it's asking for a constructor of some kind, but it's not. So that doesn't appear to be the issue. Let's go ahead and put a breakpoint on our first line here and see if it's even hit. So we're starting this application. It does hit this line. Okay, so that's good. Now if we step over this and step over the subscribe, that seems to work. And we can bind an existing list of tournaments. So let's step over that. And that seems to have worked. So the next step is to get an instance. And the instance is the shell view model, which that's what we just got. So we will step over that. Display root 4 is the next step. And then after that, it's done. It's launched, but it's not actually showing us our application. So it seems to be running. It's just not doing what we expect it to with a view. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to restart Visual Studio. Well, a restart didn't help the issue, but reading the documentation did. So let's go fix our problem. So the problem is not with our application itself. It's not with our logging system. Instead, it's with how I configured the simple container. And I should have run it. I guess I didn't run it afterwards. I should have. That's just one of those things I overlooked. But if we come here in our configuration, one of the things we need to do is we need to register two singletons, the iWindow and the iEvent aggregator. Those two things need to be registered in order for this to work. These are two items that come baked right into Caliburn Micro. By not doing that, the window manager was not started, therefore it could not do anything. It was failing silently. If we run this now, it should work. And there we go. Tournament tracker is loaded. Now what we can do is add back in our logging. So we're going to undo these comments. We're going to undo these comments. Now our logger should be in place, and oops, we got to take out the semicolon there. And it should be that it's configured properly. Now we're back to the logging side of things, and we do need to check to make sure this works because testing is good. You'll find the problems like I just did. So let's go to our view model, go to our shell view model, and in here ask for an iLogger, control dot to add that extension. We're going to say of type shell view model, call it log, and we're going to right away do log information. This is Caliburn Micro working finally. Let's hope that actually works. So let's run this application again. Wait for it to launch. And it throws an error and it says value cannot be null parameter logger. So the log itself, we go to the locals window, log is null. So it's not passing through the log properly. So therefore we can't actually log this. So back to debug mode, we're going to find out why we're not passing that log in. So let's go back to the bootstrapper and remember that right here we can actually start using the logger even before we do any work. So let's do this. Let's say log information. Oops, not log. Let's do log information and say This is our test. And it should be that it gets to that point and runs this first. I'll put a breakpoint afterwards. Let's run this and see if it actually hits this. It went past it, so now let's come look at our file, and we do in fact have that test. So we have the logging to serial log working properly. It's just that it doesn't pass it onto the shell view, and so we get this issue. So here's what we're going to do next. We're going to take out that log statement since we know it works. We're going to take off this breakpoint, and we're going to look at what this provider is doing. So we're going to put a breakpoint on the for each and another one inside. That way, if we just put one inside the for each, if there's nothing in this list, then it will give us nothing, and therefore it won't even hit this line. So I'm going to put it in both places. Let's start again. And it says the value cannot be null. So we haven't even gotten to that point yet of configuring this. The configure never seems to get to this spot. Let's go back up here and put a breakpoint on the whole thing. Let's try it again. So it hits this, and we have a handler for the iLogger factory, but we don't actually hit this when we're looking for an iLogger. So let's compare this to what we get in our WinForm application that is working using the same style of code. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to put a breakpoint on my for each, and I'm going to right click and say Startup Project and run this. And notice I hit my for each before the WinForm application even loads. And so now if I put a breakpoint inside and I hit continue, notice provider, we've got provider right here, and it's the console provider. This is from Microsoft.extensions.logging.console.console logging provider. We run it again. That's a debug logging provider. That's the event source. That's a third one. Before I said there's two, there's actually three from Microsoft extensions. Event source is the third one. And then we have event log, and now it finally loads up like so. Just to verify its timing, let's go over to our dashboard form, and let's put a breakpoint in our constructor to know if we hit the constructor first or if we hit the breakpoint for our factory. We hit the breakpoint for our factory first. So the difference is that when we do this configuration here, we configure the services, it's doing this configuration right away instead of waiting until it's needed. I think that might be our issue. So let's go over here and close these out and come back to our bootstrapper and look at what this handler is doing. This is registering a custom service handler with the container. It's for a factory. So that appears to be the right thing to use, but let's look through our list of other options here. So get all instances, we have the handler, we have the has handler. We have instances, register instance, register handler. And that's, register handler is kind of like registering a per request item, registering instance. So we don't need a register handler, I don't believe. So with that, it looks like we're not doing it quite the way we want to. So let's see if we can't refactor this and maybe get this to work. This right here, this lambda expression is just a function. So what we can do, we can actually pull this out and make sure it runs separately and get the value. So let's come up here and say var iLogger equals, and then run our our instance here. So we can, whoops, we don't want to put a code there. We want to put a call. Let's do a call that is load logger factory. And we'll pass in the simple container, which is actually a container, like so. And then let's control dot here to create that method. And it's going to do this. Whoops, I pasted the wrong one anyways. It's going to do this right here. And factory is a Serilog logger factory. So this is a Serilog logger factory. We're going to bring this in. Container is X. So now it's going to return the factory. Now, instead of doing all this work right here, what we can do is say like this and say iLogger. That's not a great name for that variable. Let's call this factory. There we go. Which is saying we can't quite do that way because of the fact that we have to pass in the container and we have, it's a function. So we can say x equals return factory like so, and that will work. Let's just see, we just kind of refactored things a little bit, made sure this ran first and was configured before we then did any other work on it. So let's do this. Let's put a semicolon here and then say underscore container here. That way we can make sure that the container has the instance of itself first before we start using it. So just some refactoring just to see what happens. This is what debugging is all about. And if you get discouraged too easily, then you might miss out on some really cool solutions that maybe no one's done before. If I run this, it just loaded my tournament tracker. Let's find out if it actually called the logger. It did not. Let's go and let's make sure we're actually loading the correct one. We're not. Haha. That's why. Set as startup project. And let's make sure that, again, that's asking for the logger. It is. That's going to be too simple, wasn't it? We run this and it says, yeah, no, logger is still null. All right, looks like it's time to do some more research into what's going on here. Okay, so I've done a little research, and I did that off camera because you really don't want to hear me banging my head against the desk over and over again and Googling things 18,000 times and reading the same article 50 times, trying to figure out where to make some tweaks to this. I spent a lot of time, well, relatively a lot of time. I spent probably 45 minutes or so trying different things, Googling it, working on this, and here's what I think we're going to do. I am going to come back to the bootstrapper, and I'm going to say, you know what? We're going to get away from this simple container. It's just not working for us. I want to use the built-in .NET Core after all, and I am just going to make it work. I think that's probably a better option. And this is one of those things where you try something, it doesn't work, give it, come up from a different angle. So get rid of a simple container, and we're going to get rid of the configure method. And we're going to get rid of this logger method. We're going to leave the on startup and the get instances and the get all instances in the build up. Now what we're going to do is bring in some additional packages that we've used in the other projects. So right click on dependencies and say manage NuGet packages. And we have the Microsoft.extensions.logging, but we don't have dependency injection. Let's install that. And we also want the Microsoft.extensions.hosting, which is right there. Install that as well. And then inside here, we're going to return host dot create default builder. We're going to pass in args. And then we're going to do a configure services. So host context and services. And this will be where we configure our dependency injection. So we're kind of going back to that now, even though it's the logging video. All right, and so now let's add services.addTransient. Control dot to add our using statement. And let's do shell view model to start. And we're going to add a couple of singletons here. Now before we had a couple of singletons added because they're what Caliburn Micro needs. So we're going to add those as well. Services dot add singleton for iWindow Manager, and that's Window Manager. And another one for add singleton iEvent Aggregator for event aggregator. And these are two that Caliburn Micro needs, and it also provides them for us. And then finally, we're going to add our logger factory. Services.add singleton for an iLogger factory. And we're going to say X lambda expression. And we're going to do the same thing we had been doing. Let's put our semicolons here with the other ones as well. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. There's no reason to retype this, I don't think. So I'm going to take this thing right here. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to paste it inside of my method. So now I have a factory being correctly, hopefully, initialized with all of my iLoggers. And now I can come up here after my log setup. I can say, let's actually create outside here an iHost host. So I can say host equals create host builder. I'm going to pass in a new string array that's just empty. That way, there's nothing that I need to pass in. So let's just grab that. So now we're doing the build on our create host builder. Now we have that iHost variable we can use. So we can come down here. Instead of this, we can say is, let's do host.services.get service, and I pass in the service type. And that comes from this. And then down here, what we'll do is we will return host.services.get services, plural, of the type service. And for this build up, we don't need to do anything. So we're going to leave that alone. So now we, in theory, are using our dependency injection system, and we are hopefully going to be able to pass in this log and log out to our log file. So let's go look at that real quick. So we can pull that up here, and we have this. It's empty right now. so we know that if anything happens, it should have something in there and we didn't do it from somewhere else. We are starting the right project. Let's start this up and see if it runs. So it does launch. That's excellent. And now if we come up here to our log file, we do have a log statement there. So we have, it's finally working. That was kind of maybe a bad omen to put that as my log statement way back when. But now we're finally getting it to work. So our tournaments are loading properly and our application's loading properly. And now we have Calibre Micro using the correct dependency injection system, the one that's more in line with the rest of our applications. And yes, that was a little complicated. The fact that we don't have dependency injection built right into WPF yet and WinForms is kind of a bummer. And the same thing with logging. The fact it's not built right in yet, it's kind of a bummer, but we can add it and it's not overwhelming to do so. Now, this process right here may seem a little overwhelming because of the fact that I went back and did a few things in order to get it right. But I kept this in here instead of trying to, show you the perfect way of doing things. But I wanted to show you some of that back and forth, trying different things, and maybe it works for a while, but then it stops working. And what do you do, and how do you add these things? Because I wanted to show off the fact that this is how development is done, especially in a cutting-edge technology, which right now .NET Core 3 is cutting edge. At some point it won't be. It'll have some more stuff around it. But when you sign up for the latest and greatest, some of that, the pain that comes from that is stuff like this, where not everything is documented yet. You have to dive through some obscure examples or try different things until you get what you need. Okay? But at the end of the day, the simple WPF demo, really simple to do. It was just making these modifications here for logging and then saying, try, catch, and finally, and also configuring the logger down here. That was pretty much it. The WPF app, ours, was a little bit messier because it's the real world, and the real world is messy. And so we are using a tool called Calibre Micro, and that has ways of doing things, and it really wants you to do things a certain way. And we try to go down that road of using it the way they wanted us to, but it just didn't work. And so we're actually now overriding their simple container with the built-in .NET Core dependency injection system. And so that's what we're doing here. And now the logging itself is just as simple as it is in the simple WPF demo. It's just configure it here and configure it down here. Now, the one thing I don't have in this one that I'm not going to add at this point, I don't want to add too much confusion here, but we don't have the close and flush on this logger. So what we're going to do is we'll hook into the events for this shell view. When the shell view closes, we'll also close this the logger. So and we'll do the close and flush there. We can listen for that down here if we want. We can create an event that listens for it so that we can know when this shell view closes and fire that event that will then say, okay, close and flush. So we'll probably do something like that. But again, we're not going to do that now. We may do that later. We may not. It's not the end of the world if we don't, because we're using the file appender. Okay, so after that video and after putting logging in, take a break, walk around for a little bit, kind of clear your head, and come on back for the next video where we're going to transition over to the app.config file, from app.config to appsettings.json files.